Kia ora and welcome to another episode of The Leadership Lounge. The Leadership Lounge is a space for healthcare leaders to take a moment, get a pause, have a refresh, get a fresh perspective on the work that you are doing every day. I'm Katie and I'm your host, and I've worked in healthcare for getting on for 30 years or around 30 years. Who really counts at this point? And I work with leaders and their teams so that they can feel supported and connected and encouraged in the work that you are doing every day. And this weekly podcast is part of that work, that service that I offer to people that are working in healthcare. And if you read my No Jedi email or on that subscriber list, which of course you really want to be, don't you? It's the thing to be getting in your inbox every week. You can sign up for that at katiequinney.com/subscribe. But if you are on that list, then you will know that I announced a bit of a shift, a bit of a change that's going on in my life. And while I have yet to do some sort of public announcement, I have been trying to contact people and let people know. So if you are someone who I should have told personally and I haven't, I'm really sorry. I'm trying to get there. There's a lot going on. So what's going on is that Adam and I have decided to move back to the UK. Now, this is for family. This is mainly for family reasons, right? Because New Zealand is a long way away from anywhere else, to be quite honest. Now, it is not a decision that has been made lightly, and it is actually quite a massive decision. And subsequently, there are masses of emotions going on around this at the moment. And as you know from the work that I do, if you read or listen or, whatever it is, you will realise that the focus, a lot of my focus in my work is around being able to just talk about our emotions, to sit with the big ones that don't particularly feel particularly pleasant, but also to being able to acknowledge, oh, look, the cat's come to say hello. Not biting me this week, but just meowing a lot. That'll be nice for you all. Oh, he's come up to my notes now. That'll be lovely. This is why I should be taking videos of this, so that you can see the cat being very cute, sitting on my notes. Really helpful. Thanks so much, Atane. Anyway, where was I? So yeah, it's as well as those difficult to manage emotions, there's also a lot in there about acknowledging the good things, recognizing when things are going well and how that feels. And so conversations about emotions, what they mean to us, all of that sort of stuff is really important to me. And I'm still learning so much around this. So I wanted this week to think about that idea of how we manage our emotions. Because if we acknowledge and kind of accept that, okay, feelings are part of being human and they're going to come up or they're not going to come up or we're going to have them or not, it's actually from a leadership perspective and in that work context, how do you manage these emotions? Now, being conscious of them and being conscious of other people's emotions, is that really one of those core parts of emotional intelligence? And if you look at an awful lot of work and research around leadership skills, emotional intelligence is one of those cool things. So smart leaders do pay attention to emotions, their own and to others. So this is a topic that leaders need to understand and get to grips with and get some ideas about. Now, there are two people that I go to that are kind of my main sources of inspiration and stuff. I'm using all the big words today, can you tell? Susan David, who wrote a book, Emotional Agility, she's absolutely spot on so many of the things around emotions. And the big thing that I learned from her that I will probably say several times a week is that emotions are data, not direction. And this is a really core point that it's okay, this is the feeling, so what is it telling me? And that's one of your first linchpins of understanding. The other people, my big faves to go to, are affectionately known as Liz and Molly. And they've written a couple of books about feelings, but one that is specifically about managing the feelings at work and that idea that feeling feelings is part of being human. And that in a work situation, when we can acknowledge that, talk about emotions, show emotions, we build more trust as leaders. So bringing your emotions to work and managing them appropriately are actually really, really core for leaders in healthcare. Now, the healthcare thing gets really interesting, right? Because the emotional labour of the work that healthcare involves for an awful lot of people is almost kind of like unrecognised, untalked about, unsaid. We just assume that you've gone into this, but actually if you think about what level of emotion you can go through on a daily basis in any job that you are in, particularly when it's around, whatever your work is doing, it will have a flow-on effect, if not a direct effect, on the communities, the patients, the families that you are serving as an organisation or as an entity, whatever it is that your work is doing. You have that direct effect. And if that be a good effect or a bad effect, that has some emotional connotations around it. So this work alone, and we talk about these ideas of having compassion burnout or moral distress, there's a lot of emotions involved in just the work of doing healthcare work. And so having an ability to understand that, to be able to talk about it and to not judge it is, again, really, really core if you're thinking about retaining staff, orientating staff, building a safe culture, building a culture that is enjoyable to be at work. Again, so really, really core to the work that we're doing as leaders. I once got told, I was trying to manage something as a fairly junior leader, and I got told to just take the emotion out of it. And it just didn't sit right. It didn't feel like it was the most logical thing to do. And in my mind then, and I've progressed in terms of understanding and reading, but it's kind of the same, our emotions are what gets us up and out of bed and into work. They drive our behaviours, which is why I have really cottoned on and using the emotional culture deck in the work that I do. Because when we start to name the emotions that we want or that we don't want, we can then start to think really clearly about what are the actions and behaviours that support that. So, coming back to that point about how do we manage the emotions when they might be flaring up. And the other sort of personal story as to why this really matters to me and why it's important is because I've messed up in this space a lot, but in particular a couple of times when I have not had control of my emotions. And it has meant that the impact that I'd have, how I have come across as a leader, the influence, all of that sort of stuff was kind of ruined a little bit. I didn't have the best impact. I wasn't making a difference. I wasn't making people feel particularly great. And that reflected back on me as a leader. So how we show up as a leader, big conversation, emotions are a big part of it. And being conscious of your emotions and then being able to manage them. I wish I had some of these skills that I am learning more recently, several years ago, would have stood me in good stead. Not to say that this work is ever done, because emotions can catch us all out of filter. And right now, like I said, how did I describe it? What's that movie called? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. That's what it feels like in terms of the emotions that's going through me at the moment. Now, the other caveat around emotions and how we manage them in a workplace setting, in a healthcare environment, we're thinking about clinical facing roles and clinical facing leadership. And when I'm talking leadership, I'm thinking whether you're the shift leader or if you're a senior person, it's not necessarily that job title, but particularly in those moments of crisis or emergency, there's some really important things, right? Because that's not the time to stop and analyse and think about, how am I feeling? What's the best way to act? We often have to act very automatically, and we often have to do things to save people's lives. Now, I don't think that excuses people to being rude or disrespectful. I still think that can be done. So the work of the leader here, and again, that leadership in that very broad setting, is to be conscious. This is an emergency situation. These things do crop up. I just need to be really conscious about X, Y, and Z. That fear makes me do this, or anxiety makes me do that. Because there's a lot of the stuff that when we think about it and reflect about a situation afterwards, it's a lot of fear, worry, concern, you want to do a good job, all of that kind of stuff. So you want to notice those triggers and how you generally cope in a crisis. So it means that you can come across clear and coherently. There's nothing worse than if you're in a cardiac arrest and the person that's yelling and shouting all these things is clearly not in control of their own emotions, so therefore they're not leading the situation well. So there's a lot around it in the emergency situation, and it can come through practice, it can come through role play, it can come from those things, but you do need to do a reflection and an honest look at yourself and how you react and respond in emotionally charged or crisis situations. because you want to come across useful and you don't want to trigger an unhelpful or an upsetting emotional response in somebody else. Now, often, I'm going off on all the places here now, often if you're working in a team and that scenario has arisen, there's often a general level of understanding and trust. So you can then rock up afterwards and go, hey, look, I'm really sorry I yelled X at you, then it was an intense situation, I'm really sorry. And they will understand, and you can work on other things that could be done differently or anything like that. There's a level of understanding. But if you are not known, or there isn't a high level of trust, or there isn't a high level of psychological safety in that environment, then that conversation afterwards might not happen, and feelings can then grow and fester, and that degrades the culture further. So the healthcare environment has some interesting add-ons that you would not read in a normal article about this kind of stuff. There's a lot to learn from the normal articles, like healthcare is not normal. There's a lot to learn from the more generic, let's say, articles around this topic. But there are some interesting nuances that when you put them into the healthcare context are really kind of like, oh yeah, so what does that mean for us? And that's why I love this work so much, right? Because you can take these important topics that we know are important and we go, how does that apply? What's different? What's the same about it? We can't just wash it off and go, oh, healthcare is different. I don't need to pay attention to that. Yeah, it is different, but there's a lot of things we can learn. So the article I found, so Liz and Molly's work is incredible, and I will do a link to their website because they've got quite a lot of variable length videos. I mean, their book is really readable, but they've also got a lot of different articles around these different topics. So there's a lot of videos you can watch and some great articles. But the one I'm going to use is an HBR article, and it was about how to manage anger at work. And what I've done is I have not necessarily going to talk about anger per se, but their principles around how to manage those emotions, because that's what we're talking about. That was my intent for this podcast. Let's talk about how to manage your emotions at work. So we've got that kind of emergency situation kind of buttoned up and go, this is a bit different, and we need to think about that, because it is often emotions can come out, and again, it ties into that how we behave and the actions we take. So, but let's put that to one side and think more generically around when different emotions might come up. So the first thing to do, to be quite honest, is just to acknowledge it. And this is why I talk about the fact that smart leaders understand emotional literacy is important. We need to know more words than angry, mad, sad, and glad. We need to be able to expand our vocabulary so that we can name the emotion that we're actually feeling. So there's a very well-known tactic called name it to tame it. And just by acknowledging what that emotion is, you're off to a good start. So acknowledge what it is that you are feeling. And whether that be anger, okay, I'm feeling angry right now. There is a different way of phrasing it, actually, which I can't remember. Need to go and look at that. The other interesting thing to talk about in this instance, when we talk about feelings, and particularly those feelings that are associated with that space of anger, is venting. Now, often people will say to me, I just need a good vent, and that is fine. And you do need that space where you can talk in a trusted space of, this is how I'm feeling, la, 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 la. Really important. But it is also important to acknowledge that chronic venting, where you are just rehashing the same problems over and over again. I'm trying to think of the fact we're so busy, I don't have any time, we don't have enough staff. If that just keeps going on, true or not, that's not helpful. So rehashing the same problems over and over again is not helpful. Doesn't mean that they're not true, but it's the chronic venting, not useful. Because basically, all you're adding to that is you're not going to make you feel any better, and you're not going to make anyone around you feel better. And if you're trying to explain to your boss about we've got not enough staff, they're going to start to switch off as well, because they're not going to like to hear the same message over and over again. What you need in that kind of situation is the opportunity to reflect on the impact that's having, or the options that are available, or the potential within the situation. So it's deeper and it's harder thinking, but that's a more productive, leader-full approach rather than that chronic venting. All right. So we've kind of had a vent. We are acknowledging what we're feeling. And now it's this space to actually understand it a little bit more. And this is the bit that I get quite excited about, because people can sometimes beat themselves up for feeling, I don't know, I'm feeling really frustrated about this. And they almost kind of down some of the emotions. And important work that I've done for a long time, but reinforced with the emotional culture deck, is there's no such thing as good or bad emotions. Coming back to that idea, emotions are data, not direction. They are telling you something, and they are telling you something important. And actually, an angry person or a frustrated person or a moaning, even a chronic venting person, tells me that they care. So I'm always interested. Even the chronic venters I'm interested in, because they care. It's the people that are saying nothing that you need to worry about. So this idea that your emotions are giving you some information, they tell you something matters. You've been triggered into a emotional response because of something. So understanding what has caused that. Was it a value that you feel has been violated? Is it about, if it's about patient care, or if it's about staff well-being, or what is the topic that has triggered that emotion? Whatever that is. And I have probably nuanced this conversation towards those less desired emotions that can sometimes get labelled as bad emotions, but it equally works for the others. Why are you feeling so joyful right now? So it's really important to notice those moments of what brings you joy and contentment and connection and support, because we're often not very good at describing those either. So remembering, what is it that's triggered the emotion? And then get a bit deeper than anger. So this is that emotional literacy part. What's the feeling beneath the surface feeling? So if it's anger, is it frustration? Is it resentment? Is it fear? Now, there's a lot of ways you can do this. So the emotional culture deck, which I've twittered on about, is really useful, because it's a game, really. It's a card game, and you have all these cards with different words on, and it takes the heavy lifting out of thinking of those words. Other useful tactics are things like an emotional wheel. Very easy. Google one of those. I'll pop a link to ones that I particularly like. But that can just help you get some more granularity beneath the surface of what is going on for this emotion for you. And then you'll find the word and you go, that's it. That's what I feel. And then you're into this name it to tame it moment. I remember the time that I was really struggling with this really gritty kind of feeling. And when I stopped and thought about it, it was like, it's resentment. That's what I'm feeling. Ugh. Now, that actually felt quite uncomfortable and quite horrible for me, and I was then Googling how to manage resentment quite quickly. However, just being able to name it and really know that I'd landed it meant I had a course of action. I was no longer sitting in this space. I'm wiggling. I wish you could see my face and my actions as I'm doing that, because I'm crunching my hands up and I'm like screwing my face up, and you all know that really kind of gritty, uncomfortable feeling of just, this is not right and I don't know what to do. As soon as I'd named it to resentment, I was like, okay, now I can take some action. Now I can get some plans in place and work out, what the hell do I do about feeling resentful? So naming it to tame it, that's your first step, because now you've got some action. What do I need to be okay now? So there can be a lot in that moment of what do I need to be okay. And so for me, I need to understand, that's kind of like my main kind of draw. I need to understand why am I feeling like this? But for other people, it might be, I just need to walk away. I just need some space. I need to not think about this. So again, that's why self-awareness is so important for leaders, right? So what do I need to do to be okay now? And then you can start to think, okay, what is the longer term outcomes that are going to help me feel a bit better? What are ways that I can either understand this, ways I can move through it, what I need to do if similar situations arise, what do I need to do about the actual context? And then you can start moving into steps that you can take. So you've moved through the emotions, but you don't, let me please underestimate this idea of sitting with the emotion, sitting with what it is. And that first step of, okay, that's what I'm feeling. All right, that's telling me something is important. It's telling me I care about this. The other thing that you need to do at this space is be able to talk about your emotions without getting emotional, if that kind of makes sense. And what they're talking about here, and they give some really good examples in the article. And that the advice my mother always used to say to me, go away and count to 10. Turns out that is quite actually very, very good advice, because it allows you to just take the heat out of the situation. You can come back and talk a little bit more calmly, coherently, and you're more likely to get to a decent conversation and a decent outcome. So this pause moment, and I really enjoy working with people when we're talking about, particularly in the moment kind of conversations, people talk about how they might react in a meeting, for example, and we talk about what they notice first. We'll often be talking about what they notice in their body and using that as a signal and as a sign to pause. They'll then reach for a glass of water. That creates a moment of pause so that they can answer clearly. And they can they can give their brain time to think, basically, rather than being in this really reactive mode. So it's lovely, this space of pause, whether that be count to 10 or take a glass of water or a big breath, finding the thing for you to create a moment of pause. Sometimes you've got enough time to walk away and come back and revisit the situation. Other times it's you need to deal with it in the moment. So there's always context and situation, environment, the people you're with. It's always going to vary. This is not a playbook that plays out exactly the same in every situation. This is something that you will test and try and adapt in all kinds of scenarios. So talking about it without talking the emotions. The other example, without talking about your emotions without getting emotional, the other example they give is to almost gauge yourself. So the thing has just happened and you are really upset, you are angry, you are sad. You can go, I'm feeling like 7 out of 10 right now. This is not a good moment to go and talk about how angry I am, because how angry I am is going to dominate the conversation and miss the whole point of why I'm angry and why it matters. Let me wait. And then when you realize your anger score is now 4 out of 10, and you can actually talk about it with a bit of kind of solution focus, and you can talk about it in terms of the impact things were having. So there's a lot about this, about the conversation that follows. When you do X, I feel Y. I feel Y when you do X, that kind of stuff. So you can start to get a little bit more logical about the feelings that you're having. There's also a space in there that we have to acknowledge some of the things that we can't change. And you need to kind of, again, this is why the understanding the emotions, what is it that's been triggered? If you're feeling a particular way about a scenario that you can't change, what else is going to help support that emotion or help you manage or cope with that emotion? And sometimes it can be walking away from the scenario, getting a fresh perspective, going to do something more productive in a different area that can bring you back some energy and some motivation. The other interesting thing they put in this article is about using that emotion. So they're talking obviously in this space of anger, but actually I got quite excited about this idea of our emotions being a motivator. So right now, with all the challenges, the issues, and all of that stuff that's going on in healthcare, and the impacts that is having, if we're talking about pay equity, if we're talking about the restructure, if we're talking about recruitment of staff, whatever it is, all that stuff, using your emotion to how you feel about that particular scenario as a motivator to stay determined, to stay in the game, to stay engaged, to find out more, to get curious. So I quite like the idea, and I probably really resonated with that because it's kind of like, okay, so if I'm feeling overwhelmed right now by all the tasks that I feel I need to get done before this big move back to the UK, how do I use that overwhelm as a space of energy and as a motivator? Because if I don't want to feel overwhelmed, then that should help me get on with all the tasks that I need to get done, maybe. So it's around trying to think about that. So this is a space of creating potential. All right. So managing our emotions, this acknowledgement that smart leaders, forward thinking, the future of healthcare is going to rely on people that can understand emotions, can talk about emotions, are aware of their own and are conscious of others. It's that acknowledgement that emotions are data, not direction. They're telling us something important, whatever these emotions are. And that's the same for when you are dealing with other people's emotions. If they're getting angry at you, they care about something. Find out what that is. So there's this space to sit with them. Sometimes you don't need things fixed. They just need to sit with that emotion, and being able to ask for what you need in that moment, but also to check in with others what they need when they are feeling a certain way. Magical kind of space that you can create for people in this sit with these emotions. And there is usually, pretty much always, something to learn in that scenario. So it's telling you important information about what you care about, what matters most. And that really connects into why you do what you do. And then you can feel motivated around continuing to do what you do, but also to generate the changes that you need around whether it be your team, your world, the larger world, the organisation. Pick your scope and go with it. There we go. Managing emotions. I hope you could feel the emotions wave throughout that I'm certainly riding at this precise moment. Thank you for all the incredibly lovely messages that I have had about the move and what that means and all of that kind of stuff. It's been really lovely to get those messages from people. I'm running a couple of emotional culture deck sessions. So there is another one coming up. This is a free workshop. We'll be asking the questions, how do you want to feel at work? And again, this is picking on some of those more desired emotions and understanding what they are for you, listening to some stories from other people and thinking about, okay, if that's how I want to feel, how do I do that? So a bit of an introduction to the emotional culture deck so that you can see how useful it can be online via Zoom, all free. Link will be in the show notes for you to join in, and I would love to meet you, love for you to come along and connect with other healthcare leaders in that session. Okie dokie. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Leadership Lounge. The Leadership Lounge will continue. The big move will not stop. I will probably pause for a couple of weeks through the actual move, but otherwise between the No Jedi email that goes out every week and this podcast, this work will continue. It is a core thing to what I do and why I do it, and I absolutely love the opportunity to be able to share and give ideas and hope, inspiration, perspective, all of that stuff to people that are out there doing the work every single day to be amazing healthcare leaders. So thank you for listening, and I'll be back next week for another episode of The Leadership Lounge.